All right, welcome back to another bonus segment of the Always Adaptive podcast. This time I am sort of piggybacking off of this week's full podcast episode where I was speaking about the ketogenic diet and the carnivore diet and their effects on power, performance, strength, body composition, things of that nature. And I want to put a special thanks out there to Physionic and his insiders community. You should definitely check out Physionic, the YouTuber, and he has a community and all that stuff, a free and a paid community. But he put me onto a study and a breakdown that he did, which was pretty interesting. Unfortunately, I had already recorded my video by the time he had sent me that, so I wasn't really able to include this study that he sent me in that video. But I figured, hey, why not? I'll just do a bonus segment because this study kind of furthers my position on the matter. Now, the study that I spoke about in the podcast, the full episode, showed that there was a significant drop in strength compared to usual diet in the keto group with bench press, squat, and also a Wingate power test, which is like a 30-second cycle max power test that they would do, where during the Wingate power test, the ketogenic diet group actually saw a significant decrease in their power, whereas with squat and bench press, they saw an increase, but it wasn't nearly as large as the usual diet group or the Western diet group, I believe. But what was interesting about that study is that those numbers showed that the Western diet was better at week 10, but then at week 11, the keto diet was able to close the gap. Now, what happened at week 11? Carbohydrates were introduced into the picture. And so the keto group was no longer keto. And in fact, they showed that in one of the graphs where it shows them measuring ketones in the body. And you can see right at week 11, their ketones are building up, and that week 11, it drops right off a cliff and they are no longer in ketosis. So that's why I really honed in on the first 10 weeks of that, because I think showing what actually happened when they were really in ketosis versus when they were out of ketosis, they weren't really able to keep up until carbohydrates were entered in the picture. And sort of in that same vein, this study that Physionic showed me, they were looking at Olympic weightlifters and powerlifting athletes, and they also measured lean body mass, and there was a significant decrease in lean body mass in this study as well. So I'm going to go over that, but I think what my stance is right now is, and again, I'm going to throw this caveat in there. I threw it in the podcast, so I'll throw it here. I'm not against the ketogenic diet. I'm not against the carnivore diet. I think they can be incredibly useful tools. Although I will say that I do not think that they are ideal for exercise that includes anaerobic glycolysis, really high intensity, prolonged efforts. They can be very useful for moderate to low intensity, long endurance efforts. You can maintain your 1 rep max strength or your 3 rep max strength, but if you do not introduce carbohydrates at some point, you will lose lean body mass. And I've shown that time and time again. I'm going to show it again here. So I think a better alternative is to have a hybrid style diet where you have, 4 weeks keto, 1 week on carbs, 4 weeks carnivore, 1 week on carbs. But that kind of, I don't want to go down a rabbit hole here, but the way that I also think about this is carnivore on its own isn't inherently dangerous. At least we don't think it is. And this kind of wades into is LDL cholesterol causative to cardiovascular disease debate? Because as you know, on the carnivore and the ketogenic diet, you will have elevated LDL cholesterol. It's kind of a given. And so if you have this elevated LDL environment and then you add carbohydrates into the mix, who knows what kind of damage or inflammation that's going to cause in the body. So it's an interesting thing to think about. Unfortunately, we don't have data on that. So that would be a really cool next thing for researchers to put their efforts into. But it's interesting to think about what would happen. Yeah, maybe they could improve their performance if they did a hybrid style keto diet, but what happens to their health doing that over and over again? I'm not sure. But the reason why this is important is because I view things through the lens of health, as I said in that podcast. And so while, yes, okay, you can maintain your performance, that's great. I work with a lot of older people, and what's really important to me is that those older people maintain their lean body mass. And when you talk to runners in the endurance community, they'll say, the ketogenic diet can keep up with carbohydrates, but they're not thinking about their lean body mass. So a lot of runners are very thin, they're very frail. And if they don't start paying attention to lean body mass, then I think they're really going to start to run into some problems later down the line as more and more runners adopt the ketogenic or the carnivore framework. And, just to give you an example of this, I recently had a star UK runner on my podcast a couple months ago, Harry Lancaster. He's 26 years old and he got osteoporosis. Now, who knows exactly why he got osteoporosis? I mean, it could have been any number of things, but he, one of the big things that he talked about is that he wasn't really paying all that much attention to his nutrition. And the one big thing that he did, he increased a couple things, but calcium, but also carbohydrates. He increased his carb intake. So I think there is sort of this movement in the endurance community where everyone's kind of going low carb right now or going keto. And I don't think it's a good thing. Because we all know gluconeogenesis, that is going to be prevalent anytime you're talking about a low carb diet. And specifically on keto, on the ketogenic diet, that's not like a very high protein diet. So gluconeogenesis, for those that aren't familiar, is the process of breaking down amino acids, converting them to glucose for your body to use for fuel. So if that happens, and you're in ketosis where you're not intaking a bunch of protein, then your body will break down your muscle, and not only that, but like gluconeogenesis can indirectly contribute to osteoporosis because of the increase in cortisol, and increase in bone resorption instead of reformation. You get the opposite. And so I think it's a really big deal that we continue to talk about this. And I'm open to critique and I want more studies. Like Physionics sent me this study. So if you know of another study, send it to me, please. But enough yapping, let's get into it. So the title of this study is called A Low Carbohydrate Ketogenic Diet Reduces Body Mass Without Compromising Performance in Powerlifting and Olympic Weightlifting Athletes. This is out of the Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research. The study investigated how a low-carb ketogenic diet affects lean body mass, body composition, and lifting performance compared to the usual diet in powerlifters and Olympic weightlifters over a 3-month period per diet phase using a randomized crossover design. Now, this is really interesting because the athletes did both diets. So they did their usual diet first, and then they switch over to a low-carb ketogenic diet. Now the number of participants was 14 competitive powerlifters and Olympic weightlifters. 5 of those were female. Average lifting experience, 6.2 years. So these are very experienced people. 2 participants dropped out. So small sample size, not a great sample size, but again, when combined with the other data that's out there, which there is quite a bit of it too, that will show that there is a decrease in lean body mass, I think we can't just discount it because it's a smaller study, because there are other studies that are very well done, like the one that I mentioned, and they show the same thing. So lifting performance, 1 rep max strength results, no significant differences in 1 rep max strength between low carb ketogenic diet and usual diet. So cool. And we all kind of know that performance is going to be about the same for most people. Athletes maintain strength throughout both diet phases. Power to weight ratio remains stable, meaning weight loss on low carb ketogenic diet did not negatively impact relative strength. So now let's talk about the average weight loss. The low carb ketogenic diet resulted in an average weight loss of around 3.26 kilograms, 7.2 pounds, more than the usual diet. This is statistically significant. Now, this is important because when we go to lean body mass, the low carb ketogenic diet lost 2.26 kilograms, almost 5 pounds. So almost 5 pounds of the weight that they lost, which that's most of the weight by far, was from lean body mass. That mass change was not significantly different between diets. Now, I want to talk about something here. I mentioned that there were no statistically significant differences between the usual diet and the ketogenic diet in lifting performance. But if we actually look at figure E out of these graphs, that is looking at lifting performance. And if you notice, the dots on the left are the usual diet. And remember, the athletes went through both diet phases. So they did usual diet and then they switched over to low carb ketogenic diet. So the dots on the left are usual diet, dots on the right are low carb ketogenic diet. You can see that almost all of the participants actually had a decrease in performance. And it's only because of a few outliers that the graph remained positive. So you can see there is one outlier who saw really substantial strength gains, and that is completely skewing the graph. But there's only 3 individuals that saw an increase. The rest of the individuals saw a decrease, and 1 individual stayed about the same. So this is why it's important to not just listen to the mean difference and to actually look at individual differences, especially like this isn't a large scale study. There's only 14 participants. So it's easy to look at these graphs and pick it out and see what did actually happen to each person. So really what you could say is that the low carb ketogenic diet did not actually sustain strength across the trial and actually saw mostly performance losses. Now, there are those out there that would say, well, that's probably just water. Okay, I understand that sentiment, but the burden of proof isn't on the people saying that it's muscle mass to prove that it's muscle mass, to prove that it's actually lean body mass. The burden of proof is on the people saying that it's water to prove that it's actually water weight. Yeah, there are better tests to test lean body mass to make sure it's actually muscle or bone or whatever. But by that same logic, if you're saying that decreasing carbohydrate is decreasing water weight, then by that same logic, you would have to change your findings of all the other studies that show an increase in carbohydrate and an increase of muscle and say, oh, well, it's not actually an increase in muscle. It's just an increase in water weight. You see how those two things kind of like people tend to hand wave like, oh, that's just water weight. And the mechanism is there. Yes, your muscle glycogen holds a lot of water. It's 1 gram of glucose to about 3 to 4 grams of water. So if you don't have carbohydrate coming into the system, then yes, you will start to lose a little bit of water weight, but we can't say all of it is water weight. And especially when the usual diet actually had a slight increase. So now the participants followed an ad libitum diet, meaning they could eat however much they wanted to. And, it's well known that with the ketogenic diet, that kind of decreases cravings a lot of the time. So what likely could have happened for some of the individuals, and you see it represented in the graph, that some people did lose a lot of weight. And so very much so like the strength numbers, how there's a few individuals skewing it positive, there could be a few individuals skewing it negative as well. Because with the ketogenic diet, if you're not craving and you're not eating enough food, yeah, you're going to lose weight. And in that same vein, if you're not eating enough food, you're probably not eating enough protein. So again, this is why it is very important to look at individual differences and not just look at the mean and just throw it out and not just read the words not statistically significant and throw it out as well. But I think the takeaway here is, again, the ketogenic diet can be successful for a lot of people. I think it takes a lot of careful planning. You have to plan your protein intake. It's probably a really good idea to plan some strategic carbohydrate reintroduction at some point, maybe week 4, maybe week 6, whatever. It doesn't matter. Just very much like a carb refeed day during the week, like bodybuilders do. Carbohydrates are useful. Carbohydrates don't make you fat. Carbohydrates aren't the originator of disease and all this stuff that so many of these like longevity and keto and carnivore zealots would have you believe. Carbs are not bad on their own. If you want to look to a culprit of what's happening in the country today, look to highly palatable processed foods that combine fat and carbs. Like if you look at the pastries and stuff that people are eating today, it's not just carbohydrates. In fact, some of the time it'll be like 25 grams of carbs, 25 grams of fat, like a lot of fat in this like little pastry or this cinnamon roll or whatever. Like the next time you're at a grocery store, go look at like the pastries and the cookies and stuff. All the cookies have a lot of fat in them. It's pretty obnoxious. So it's not carbs on their own. It's not fat on its own. It's the combination of it combined with other lifestyle factors like stress or not sleeping enough, alcohol intake, all these different things, dehydration, a lack of supplementation, if you want to go down that route. But I think more importantly, though, like don't be attached to one diet or the other. You should try and stay flexible and it should depend on what are you training for? What is your goal right now? Like if you're training for max performance on something, it's probably not a good idea to go keto. If you're training to lose just some fat, if you're just trying to lose some weight, then yeah, keto and carnivore can be great tools. If you have some sort of chronic disease and you're just experimenting with things, keto and carnivore can be great elimination style diets in your toolbox to help you eliminate a bunch of stuff and see, okay, maybe carbs were messing with me, but what kind of carb was it? Was it the bread? Was it the cereal? Was it the oatmeal? And then you slowly reintroduce stuff back in and you figure out what was the actual thing that was causing it. But I hope you enjoyed this bonus segment. This was a really interesting study and a special thanks again to Physionic. I'm really glad to be a part of his community now. And I'm liking this style of video where just going through studies and, kind of just riffing off of it and saying my opinion on things. So yeah, if you like the video, leave a like, leave a comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell. And yeah, I will see you at the next one.